The History of Curriculum in America, Part 1. So the 1640s to the 1790s, let's remember that the New England colonies were organized by Puritans. Well, for education, this means that the whole purpose of education is basically to learn to read so that they can teach you religious beliefs and avoid the cultural decline that could happen in this wild, savage land. Boston officials were among the very first to go out and actually hire a schoolmaster for their town. And then Massachusetts General Court in 1647 passed the Old Deluder Satan Act, which said towns that had 50 or more families had to make some provision for reading and writing. And if you had a city that had 100 households or more, you had to create a grammar school to prepare the boys for entry into Harvard. But honestly, these were hardly ever enforced. So let's continue here. The first American schools that we really see were basically groups of families. And then there were individuals who had money to bring in tutors for their own kids. Education, it was still, even despite what the Puritans were pushing about how it's the community's for the best of the community, we all need to do this, it was still more of an individual responsibility than considered a right. Now then we get through the Revolutionary War and we see a lot of basic schools opening up. These served students ages 3 to 21, but you can see most were 5 to 13. And the teachers lived with either a local family or they bounced around from family to family. Your curriculum at the time was good old-fashioned survival stuff, reading, writing, and basic arithmetic. And then for extra money, you could take Latin, music, geometry, surveying, and elocution. There was a lot of peer teaching going on, and this was also when there were major apprenticeships going on in the United States. You learned silversmithing by a silversmith. So then we get into the 1820s and we see the rise of common schools and academies. Common schools, these were open to all schools. They were publicly funded. And it was the first time really that your average child had the opportunity to gain knowledge just for the sake of being educated, not just the survival stuff. These schools were registered with the state, but it was more just kind of a control and a numbers issue than it was worrying about the quality of the learning. Now, at the same time, we had very exclusive private academies, two of which are still around today. These were privately funded, these had multiple teachers, and they were all subject specialists. There really was no state involvement here either, aside from giving out the charter, selling the charter. So then we get into the 1830s, and we see the growth of people like Horace Mann and Henry Barnard, very famous individuals in American education. And as friends of education, what they set out was, let's go back to the old Deluder Act. That whole thing about 50 families seems to be a magic number. Any township that had 50 or more families had to organize a real school. States started licensing teachers, and for the first time we see standardized methods and curriculum. And for the first time, we had full-time state licensed administrators, and grades started getting broken out by age. Now, let's think about this. Why in the 1830s would this occur? Well, again, education in the whole country started out from New England, right? But around the 1830s, we see a lot of people in New England starting to feel very uncomfortable. What's going on in the 1830s in our country? A wave of immigration. We have all kinds of people coming in and moving west. So as they're moving west, the people who are used to being the power structure are feeling like, what are they doing out there? They're not necessarily doing what we think they're doing. So there was a big part of trying to keep control over where this country was moving. Again, why were they uncomfortable? You tell me. Think about it for a minute. So we get the Department of Education. 1867, yes, this was actually part of the charter, to promote the Anglo-Saxon frame of mind and share best methods and curricula. There was no testing, there was no punitive this, do this, or we don't give you that. It was basically a clearinghouse. So here we go. In 1871, something very interesting happens. So the University of Michigan sends out faculty to inspect high schools. And if your high school passed, your students could go right to the university without having to take an exam. Okay, so Here we go. This saved faculty time because up to this point, the faculty were giving individual entrance exams. So theoretically, this made it more fair, right? Because if you didn't have one teacher who could be maybe giving answers to somebody or helping somebody else or changing the answers so that somebody couldn't figure out how to answer the question, made it more fair. But here's the kicker. What it did was it solidified the idea that, the whole goal of going to high school is to go to college, right? Moving along a little further, the National Education Association appoints a committee of 10. This is in the end of the 1800s. Why did they do this? Nobody knew what was going on in high schools. It was such a mishmash. So this committee of 10 was supposed to study the situation and give a report as to how we could make high schools better for the general public. Now let's take a second and look at who the committee was. 6 college presidents, the U.S. Commissioner of Education, 2 public high school principals, 1 private school headmaster. All right, so what do you think these gentlemen decided that an American high school education should be? This is what they said. However, when you come to this conclusion, what does it mean? It means that, well, sure, you don't have to go to college, but your best education is college preparatory anyway, so we're going to make high school be a preparatory experience for college. Here we go, folks. 1893. You need 8 years of an elementary education and then 4 years of a secondary education. You don't need electives. This is college prep. You know what you need to learn. All courses need to last exactly the same minutes so that when you get to college, you're all prepared to study together. Okay, 1893, because it served what they felt was most appropriate for their society. What did they leave out? Art and music, physical education, and any type of vocational education. Very frustrating because actually at this time, there was a great deal of really good vocational ed going on in the western and midwestern states. Again, and the powers that be felt that that was what best served their society. So they considered this a modern curriculum, right? The end of the 1800s. Very classical college prep. No emphasis or respect for practical, hands-on, vocational, applied, grounded in on-the-job training kind of stuff. But around this time is when we start to see the growth of some of those wacky progressives, like that young little John Dewey out there causing all kinds of trouble talking about learning through doing. That doesn't exactly jibe with what these gentlemen said. Move on up to 1909. All right, people have been trying, but without any uniformity or real guidelines, high school is still pretty much a mess. So the Carnegie Foundation, which is still around today and doing some really cool stuff, created what's called the Standard Unit, the Carnegie Unit. Each hour in the classroom must contain 50 minutes of actual instructional time. Does that sound familiar? This is what our education today is still based on. This is what you guys right now here in Chapman are doing. For every credit that you get, it makes up a certain number of Carnegie units. All right, so the NEA comes back in 1918 with the cardinal principles of secondary education. Ooh, sounds spooky, but actually it was very, very much welcomed by educators and progressive educators at the time. They felt that you needed health, command of fundamental processes, worthy home membership, vocation, civic education, worthy use of leisure time, and ethical character to be a complete American high school graduate. Why? What were these principles designed to do? Democracy through cohesion and social solidarity. What does that look like? We need dances so that people can, learn how to socialize. We need drama classes so they learn how to express themselves and are able to get along in a society. Oh, and we've got to have sports. That'll really make sure that people are able to get along. Okay, why was this important in 1918? What happened in 1918? The end of World War I. There we go. So, for the first time, there's this desire to truly build this core American character that's able to go out in the world and represent being American. So in our next thrilling episode, my friends, be prepared to discuss some really interesting things. Thank you.